His name is on my desk. It's typed neatly on a standard-issue manila file folder, resting atop a stack of pending disciplinary reviews and promotion recommendations. A simple name. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne. To anyone else in this headquarters, with its hum of computers and the low murmur of professional voices, it would be just another name, another soldier who had stepped out of line, another case to be processed through the great, grinding machinery of military justice. But to me, sitting here in an office that still sometimes feels like it belongs to someone else, the name is a ghost. It's a shard of shrapnel that has been lodged in my soul for 8 long years, and now, with a cold, bureaucratic inevitability, it has worked its way to the surface. He left me on a battlefield to die. And now, as Captain Alara Vance, the officer appointed to preside over his court-martial, I am the one who will decide his fate. The irony is a cold, hard stone in my stomach, a weight I carry with every breath I take in this room. My aide, a fresh-faced lieutenant whose name I can never quite remember in moments of high stress, had placed the file in my urgent tray this morning. His voice was crisp, impersonal, devoid of any understanding of the earthquake he was triggering in my world. Case of gross dereliction of duty, Captain, he'd said, snapping a sharp salute. Sergeant Thorne abandoned his post during a critical retrograde operation in the Arazal Valley. Left a fellow soldier behind. The JAG office has forwarded all the evidence. Your preliminary review is requested before the proceedings begin. I thanked him, my voice a marvel of neutral composure, and waited for the heavy oak door to click shut behind him before I allowed my hands to tremble, before I had to lean on the solid wood of my desk for support. Now, hours later, I stare at the folder, the stark, black letters of his name feeling like a brand seared into my vision. I don't need to open it to know the details. I don't need to read the dry, clinical summaries of the incident. I was there. I am the fellow soldier he left behind. I am the living, breathing evidence of his failure. My office is quiet, a sanctuary of order and control that I have meticulously built. The only sounds are the low, constant hum of the air conditioning and the distant, rhythmic thump of a Black Hawk helicopter landing at the airfield beyond my window. The walls are a sterile, inoffensive beige, adorned with the necessary credentials, my diplomas, my commission from Officer Candidate School, a formal photograph of my graduating class, my face a determined, younger version of itself amidst a sea of similarly determined faces. On the corner of my desk, positioned with deliberate care next to the dreaded file, sits a small, simple, silver-framed picture. It's of me in my dusty combat gear, my arms slung around the shoulders of a woman with a fierce, gap-toothed grin and eyes that held a universe of kindness and courage, Corporal Anya Petrova. My friend. My sister in arms. The one who didn't make it back. Her face is a daily reminder of why I do this job, of the sacred trust we hold, and of the devastating, permanent cost of failure. Of betrayal. I remember the heat of the Arazal Valley with a clarity that time has done nothing to dim. It wasn't just weather, it was a physical weight, an oppressive presence that pressed down on you from the moment the sun rose, sucking the moisture from your skin and the air from your lungs. The dust was a fine, red, talcum powder-like substance that was utterly inescapable. It got into everything, the creases of your eyes, the grit between your teeth, the intricate working parts of your rifle, your very soul. It coated the world in a film of rust-colored despair. We were a 5-person reconnaissance team, call sign Spectre, tasked with observing a suspected insurgent supply route snaking through the jagged, unforgiving mountains. There was me, a young, fiercely determined Sergeant Vance at the time, Anya, our brilliant and unflappable medic, Corporal Liam Chin, our quiet and competent communications specialist, Private David Miller, the fresh-faced, eager new kid on his first deployment, and Sergeant Marcus Thorne, our team leader. Our rock. Marcus. He was a legend in the unit, a man who seemed carved from the same granite as the mountains we patrolled. Charismatic, physically powerful, with a confidence that felt like a solid, unbreachable wall you could hide behind. I looked up to him with a respect that bordered on reverence. I think we all did. He had a way of making you feel invincible, even when the intelligence reports were sketchy, the terrain was openly hostile, and the air itself tasted of danger. The mission was supposed to be textbook. In and out, 48 hours. Observe and report. No contact. But in that part of the world, a place that had seen centuries of conflict, simplicity was a luxury we were rarely afforded. Complacency was a prelude to death. On our second night, as the brutal sun dipped below the razor-edged horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and blood orange, our position was compromised. It happened with a sudden, shocking violence that ripped the quiet evening apart. A single, misplaced step by Miller, a step off the designated path, triggered an old, crude, but brutally effective IED hidden on a goat path. The world exploded. The blast wasn't powerful enough to kill him outright, but it was a savage, tearing force that shredded his leg and sent a plume of dust and smoke high into the still air, a perfect, damning signal flare for anyone watching. Within minutes, before the ringing in our ears had even subsided, the distinctive, terrifying crackle of small arms fire erupted from the surrounding ridges. We were surrounded. We were pinned down. Chaos. That's the only word for it. The world dissolved into a deafening cacophony of noise and pure, undiluted fear. The sharp, percussive bang of RPGs impacting the rocks around us, the whine of bullets ricocheting with angry, bee-like sounds, Chen's frantic, raised voice yelling into the radio for air support, for extraction, for a miracle. Miller was screaming, a high, ragged, animal sound of pure terror and agony. Anya was already crawling towards him through the dirt and shattered rock, her med kit clenched in her teeth, her face a mask of intense concentration, all her focus channeled into the task of saving a life. And Marcus. Marcus was shouting orders, but his voice had lost its deep, steady, commanding tone. It was higher, strained, frayed at the edges. I could see the fear in his eyes, a wild, animal panic that I had never seen there before, a look that was utterly alien on the face of the man I thought I knew. The invincible wall was cracking, and through the cracks, I saw raw, undiluted terror. We have to fall back, he yelled over the din, gesturing wildly towards a lower, more defensible ridge that offered a sliver of cover. To the secondary rally point. Chen, what's the ETA on that extract? Give me good news, damn it. 30 minutes, Sarge. Maybe more. They're dealing with another contact to the north. Chen shouted back, his knuckles white as he gripped the handset, his face pale under a layer of grime. 30 minutes is a lifetime. Marcus screamed, the words tearing from his throat. He looked from Miller, who was writhing on the ground, his leg a ruin of blood and fabric, to the advancing muzzle flashes winking in the gathering darkness. The calculation was happening in his head, a cold, brutal arithmetic of survival, and I could see it, plain as day on his face. The calculation between mission and man, between duty and brotherhood, between survival and sacrifice. And he was coming up with the wrong answer. The coward's answer. Grab the sensitive gear. Destroy what you can't carry. We move, now, he ordered, his voice a harsh bark. I froze, my rifle stock pressed tight against my cheek, my finger resting on the trigger guard. I was firing controlled bursts, but my mind was reeling. Marcus, we can't. Miller can't walk. Anya's with him. We can't just leave them. He's a liability, Vance, he snarled, turning on me, his face contorted into a mask of fury and fear, a stranger's face wearing the skin of a man I had trusted with my life. We all die if we stay. That's a direct order. Chin, grab the codes and the comms. Vance, you cover our retreat. Anya looked up from where she was desperately trying to staunch the pulsing flow of blood from Miller's femoral artery. Her eyes met mine across the few yards of bullet-swept ground, and in that split second, a lifetime of understanding passed between us. She knew. She knew what Marcus was about to do. She knew the choice he was making, and the choice I was being forced to make. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Don't. Don't challenge him. Don't throw your life away for a lost cause. Don't let his betrayal claim you, too. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, fueled by a loyalty that ran deeper than fear, deeper than any regulation. I'm not leaving them, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, but firm, a rock in the swirling river of panic. Marcus's eyes widened in sheer, disbelieving fury. That's a direct order, Sergeant. I will not have insubordination on my battlefield. Then court-martial me. I yelled back, the words ripped from a place of pure, desperate defiance. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, we stared at each other across the few feet of rocky, blood-spattered ground that separated us. The air sizzled with the heat of tracers. I saw the exact moment he broke. The exact moment the man I respected, the leader I would have followed into hell, ceased to exist. His shoulders slumped in a gesture of profound surrender, then tensed again with a new, terrible purpose. He looked at me, at Anya working frantically over Miller, not as comrades, not as brothers and sisters in arms, but as obstacles. As dead weight. As anchors that would drag him down into the grave with us. Your funeral, he spat, the words laced with a venom that chilled me to the bone, and then he turned. He and Chin, who, after a single, terrified, apologetic glance back at us, chose to follow his team leader, scrambled over the ridge and disappeared into the gathering darkness. Just like that. The sound of their retreat, the frantic crunch of their boots on gravel, was swiftly swallowed by the ongoing, intensifying firefight. The silence they left behind was more deafening, more horrifying, than any explosion. The three of us were alone. Utterly and terrifyingly alone. Miller was sobbing quietly now, his screams having given way to a shocky, hopeless whimper. Anya's hands were slick and red with his blood, moving with a swift, practiced efficiency, but her face was pale, a tight mask of concentration and dread. She tied a tourniquet above the gruesome wound, twisting the rod until the bleeding slowed to a trickle, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. "Elara," she said, her voice remarkably, impossibly calm, a steady beacon in the storm. "We need to get him to that lower ridge. It's our only chance. It won't hold them for long, but it's something." I provided covering fire, my movements automatic, my mind a numb void, as she half-dragged, half-carried the dead weight of Miller towards the scant cover of the boulders. We made it, collapsing behind the largest one, our chests heaving, our lungs burning. The insurgents, sensing weaker, wounded prey, began to advance more boldly, their shouts growing closer. We were running critically low on ammo. Hope was running even lower. "Anya," I whispered, my throat raw from dust, cordite, and adrenaline. "The extract, they have to come." She shook her head, not looking at me as she reloaded her sidearm with her last magazine. Her movements were precise, final. "They're not coming back for us, Elara. You know they're not. Marcus will make sure of that. We're a complication he's already erased. We fought. For what felt like a small, brutal eternity, we fought. I fired until my rifle was almost too hot to hold and my last magazine was spent, the bolt locking back on an empty chamber with a sound of finality that echoed in my soul. Anya used her pistol with a cool, terrifying precision that belied the absolute chaos surrounding us. But we were outnumbered, outgunned, and utterly out of options. I remember a sudden, searing hot pain in my side, a white-hot lance of agony that felt like I'd been punched by a fist of fire. I stumbled, my vision blurring at the edges, the world tilting on its axis. The last thing I saw before the darkness rushed up to claim me was Anya, standing over me and Miller, firing her last, precious rounds, a final, defiant, gut-wrenching scream tearing from her throat, a sound of pure, unyielding courage that was the last thing I would hear for a very long time. I woke up days later in a sterile, white room in a military hospital in Germany. The world was a blur of acoustic ceiling tiles, the monotonous beeping of heart monitors, and a pain that was a constant, grinding presence, a new part of my identity. A colonel with a kind, deeply tired face was standing by my bed. In a gentle, measured tone, he told me I had been rescued by a quick reaction force that had been diverted after a different unit had intercepted our abandoned, looping distress call. They found me, unconscious and bleeding out from a gunshot wound to the abdomen and multiple shrapnel injuries. They found Miller, dead from a single, execution-style gunshot wound to the head. They found Anya, her body positioned directly over mine, as if using her own form as a final, futile shield, killed by multiple gunshot wounds at close range. But they did not find Marcus Thorne or Liam Chin. They had made it to the extraction point alone, the only two survivors of Spectre team. Their story was clean, simple, and tragically believable. They claimed our entire team had been wiped out in a massive, coordinated ambush, that they had only barely escaped with their lives after a heroic last stand. It was my word, the word of a traumatized, critically wounded female sergeant, against the word of a respected, decorated team leader and his communication specialist, both of whom told a consistent, if tragic, tale. The official investigation was a quiet, perfunctory formality. I was the problem. I was the one who had, by my own admission, disobeyed a direct order. I was the one whose survival was an inconvenient truth that complicated a clean, heroic narrative. The shrapnel in my leg, the bullet wound in my side, these were not evidence of my sacrifice, but souvenirs of my disobedience. I was medically discharged, handed a Purple Heart and a pat on the back, and pushed out the door with a pension and a body that no longer worked the way it was supposed to. The army, it seemed in those dark days, preferred the clean, simple story to the messy, ugly, complicated truth. Marcus was quietly reassigned to a training unit back in the States. Chin left the service altogether. And I was left with nothing but the ghosts of my friends, a body scarred and broken, and a soul poisoned by a betrayal so profound it felt like a mortal wound. The years that followed were a different kind of battle, a war fought in the silent, lonely trenches of my own mind and body. A battle against physical pain that was a constant, grinding companion. The shrapnel they couldn't remove sent lightning bolts of agony down my leg with every step, a permanent reminder of that ridge. The memory of that night was a recurring, vivid nightmare, playing on a relentless loop behind my eyelids every time I closed my eyes. I saw Anya's face, fierce and determined in the dome light. I heard Miller's screams turn to whimpers. I felt the cold, gut-wrenching terror of being left behind, the sound of those retreating footsteps etched into my hearing. I drifted through life, a hollowed-out shadow of the person I had been. I worked a series of dead-end jobs, isolated from my family who couldn't understand the impenetrable darkness that had taken root in me. My father, a Vietnam vet who had his own demons, tried to reach me, tried to pull me back from the brink, but I built a wall around myself, higher and thicker than any I had encountered in the Arazal Valley. How could I explain that the greatest wound, the one that refused to heal, wasn't from the enemy, but from the man who was supposed to be my brother, my leader, my protector? It was my father, in one of his rare, stubbornly persistent moments, who finally found a crack in my armor. He found me one afternoon, sitting in the dim light of my cramped apartment, just staring at a blank wall, a cold cup of coffee in my hand. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me to get over it or move on. He just sat down next to me on the worn sofa, the springs creaking under his weight, and waited. He waited until the silence became a shared thing, not an isolating one. Then he said, his voice rough with age and his own hard-won wisdom, "You can let this destroy you, Alara. God knows, it would destroy a lesser person. Or you can use it. You can let it fester and rot you from the inside out, or you can take that pain and you can forge it into something useful. But hiding from it, pretending it doesn't exist, that isn't living. It's just a slower, more painful way of dying." He left then, without another word, but he left a single, folded brochure on my coffee table. It was for a program that helped veterans transition into becoming commissioned officers. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. The thought of going back into that world, the world of uniforms and salutes and chain of command, felt like willingly walking back into a burning building. The physical therapy to get my body strong enough to even attempt the brutal fitness tests was a daily exercise in agony and humiliation. The academic work was a monumental struggle, my concentration shattered by the ghosts that followed me from room to room. I was older than the other candidates. I was broken where they were whole and eager. I saw the doubt in the eyes of some of my instructors, the ones who had access to my file, who knew my history. The sergeant who disobeyed a direct order. The one who got her team killed. The old, official, sanitized narrative clung to me like a bad smell, a stain I couldn't wash out. But my father's words had lit a fire in me, a fire that refused to be extinguished. It was no longer the idealistic, patriotic fire I'd carried as a young enlistee, ready to save the world. This was a colder, harder, more determined fire. The fire of justice. The fire of a promise I had made to Anya and Miller in the quiet, sacred space of my own shattered heart. I would not let their sacrifice be buried by a lie. I would not let Marcus Thorne's betrayal be the last word on their lives. I would get into a position of authority, a position where I could ensure, with every fiber of my being, that no soldier, no airman, no Marine would ever have to experience the gut-wrenching betrayal I had endured. I would become the officer that Marcus Thorne had so catastrophically failed to be. I graduated at the very top of my class. The look on the commanding general's face as he pinned the gold bars of a second lieutenant onto the lapel of my new dress uniform is something I will carry with me forever. It wasn't just pride in my achievement, it was a profound sense of vindication. It was the first, significant crack in the wall of official silence and complicity that had surrounded my case for years. My career since that day has been entirely defined by that moment. I have been relentless, driven, uncompromising, sometimes to the point of being called cold, harsh, or unforgiving by my subordinates and peers. I demand excellence from my soldiers because I know, intimately, the catastrophic cost of failure. I have earned a reputation for being scrupulously, almost painfully, fair. I follow the regulations not because they are arbitrary rules, but because they exist to create order from chaos, to prevent the kind of situational madness that leads to cowardice and betrayal. I have missed family holidays, my sister's wedding, my father's 70th birthday party, because my mission to uphold that standard, always came first. The uniform I wear each day is not just cloth and thread, it is my armor against the past, my penance for surviving, and my living promise to the dead. And now, that very same uniform, that very same journey, has brought me full circle. To this desk. To this file. To his name. I finally, slowly, open the folder. The pages inside are a dry, dispassionate, clinical account of the incident that has now, finally, ensnared Marcus Thorne. It seems his cowardice was not a one-time, pressure-induced break, but a deep-seated character flaw. On a joint training mission in Poland, during a simulated enemy attack that involved live-fire exercises, he had panicked again. When the scenario intensified beyond the expected parameters, he had abandoned his platoon, leaving them confused, leaderless, and vulnerable, to save his own skin. This time, there were too many witnesses, Allied officers, neutral observers, his own bewildered soldiers. This time, his story, his excuses, didn't hold up under scrutiny. His career is over. The only question that remains is the severity of his punishment. A simple dishonorable discharge? A term in a military prison? The sentencing recommendation is mine to make. My word will carry immense weight at his court-martial. The pre-trial meeting is held in a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room down the hall from my office. I sit at the head of the long, polished table, my back ramrod straight, my hands folded neatly in front of me. My uniform is pristine, my captain's bars gleaming under the harsh lights. The door opens, and he walks in, followed by his jack-appointed lawyer, a major I've seen around headquarters. Marcus Thorne. He looks older, of course. The charismatic, square-jawed confidence is gone, replaced by a shrunken, weary posture. His hair is thinner, graying at the temples, his face lined with the stress of his impending doom. But his eyes are the same. And when they meet mine, they widen in a shock so profound, so total, it seems to suck all the oxygen from the room. He hadn't known. He hadn't known that the officer presiding over his destruction would be me. Captain Vance, his JAG lawyer, Major Evans, says formally, breaking the thick silence. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us prior to the proceedings. I nod, my gaze never leaving Marcus. It feels like looking at a corpse, a ghost from a life I barely survived. Major. Sergeant Thorne. Marcus just stares, his mouth slightly agape. He looks from my face, which holds no warmth, no recognition, only the detached professionalism of an officer, to the nameplate on my desk, to the twin silver bars on my collar, as if trying to solve an impossible, terrifying equation. The girl he left for dead, the junior NCO whose life he deemed expendable, is now the captain, the ranking officer, who holds his future, his freedom, his very honor, in her hands. The universe, it seems, has a vicious, brutally poetic sense of justice. The meeting proceeds with a stilted, painful formality. The major lays out a plea for leniency. He talks about Marcus's many years of otherwise good service prior to the Arazel Valley incident, his wife and 2 young children back home, the immense, unique stress of combat leadership, suggesting it can cause even the best soldiers to break. He paints a picture of a good, solid soldier who made a single, terrible, one-time mistake under unimaginable pressure. I listen, my expression a neutral mask, but inside, I am screaming. A one-time mistake? He left us. He left Anya to die a hero's death, alone and abandoned. He left Miller to bleed out and then be executed. He left me to be torn apart by shrapnel and bullets. He then lied about it, calmly and convincingly, and let the United States Army bury the truth along with my friends. He built the rest of his career on the graves of his own team. When the major is finished, he looks at me expectantly, hopefully. Given these mitigating circumstances, Captain, we believe a general discharge, in lieu of a full court-martial, would be a fair and just outcome. It allows Sergeant Thorne to retain some dignity and provide for his family, while still acknowledging his error in judgment. I let the silence hang in the room for a long, heavy moment, my eyes still locked on Marcus. I want him to feel the weight of my gaze, the weight of the past 8 years. Does the sergeant have anything he wishes to add for the record? My voice is flat, cold, the tone you would use with a stranger. He flinches as if struck. He looks down at his hands, clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table, then back up at me. The fear in his eyes is the same raw, animal fear I saw on that ridge. It's a fear I know intimately. Ilara. Captain. I don't know what to say. His voice is a hoarse whisper. Try, I say, the single word dropping into the silence like a stone into a still pond. He takes a ragged, shuddering breath. I think about it. Every day. I think about what I did, what I didn't do. I was scared. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just I saw a way out, and I took it. I panicked. I'm so sorry. For Miller. For Petrova. For you. His words are hollow, rehearsed. They are the words of a man who is sorry he got caught, sorry his past has finally caught up with him, not truly, deeply sorry for the monstrous choice he made and the lives he obliterated because of it. Your panic cost 2 lives, Sergeant, I say, my voice dangerously quiet, each word precisely aimed. Your panic almost cost a 3rd. And then, you didn't just run. You lied. You lied to the investigating officers. You lied to your command. You let the blame for the failure fall on the dead and the wounded. You built the remainder of your career on the graves of your own team. That's not a mistake. That is a conscious, repeated series of choices. Choices that define who you are. He has no answer. He has no defense against the stark, ugly truth. He just stares at the grained wood of the table, utterly defeated, a hollowed-out shell of the man he once pretended to be. I stand up, the legs of my chair scraping against the polished floor with a sound that is jarringly final. The court-martial will proceed as scheduled. I have heard your statement. You are both dismissed. The major looks stunned, his plea for leniency having fallen on what he clearly perceives as deaf, unforgiving ears. But he is a professional, and he knows better than to argue with the presiding officer. He gathers his papers and ushers a broken, shuffling Marcus Thorne from the room. As the door closes behind them, I finally allow myself to exhale, a long, shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands are trembling. I walk to the window and look out at the parade ground below, where a company of new recruits is marching in perfect, synchronized formation, their drill sergeant's bark faintly audible through the glass. The past and the present have collided in this sterile room, and the aftershocks are rattling my very foundation, threatening to crack the calm, controlled facade I have worked so hard to build. The night before the court-martial, I don't sleep. I sit in the quiet of my quarters on base, Anya's dog tags, which were recovered from the scene and later given to me by her grieving parents, clenched tightly in my fist. The cold, stamped metal is a tangible, solid connection to her, to the past, to the promise I made. I think about justice. What does it truly mean? Is it the simple, visceral satisfaction of sending Marcus Thorne to a military prison for years, of watching him be stripped of his rank and thrown into a cell? Is that what Anya would have wanted? Would that hollow act bring her back? Would it heal the scar tissue on my side or the deeper, more ragged scar on my soul? For 8 years, I have lived for this moment. I have built my entire life, my entire identity, around the idea of confronting him, of exposing him, of making him pay for what he did. But now that the power is mine, now that his fate is literally in my hands, the anticipated triumph feels empty. Ashen. I think about my father's words, the ones that saved me. You can use it. Use this pain. Use this knowledge. Use this position. What is the right thing to do? Not the vengeful thing, which would be easy. Not the emotionally satisfying thing, which would be to break him as I was broken. The right thing. The thing that honors Anya's sacrifice, not my thirst for retribution. The thing that truly serves the army and the soldiers in it. The courtroom is packed on the day of the trial. The air is thick with a palpable tension. Marcus sits at the defendant's table, flanked by Major Evans, looking small and shrunken in his uniform, which now seems to hang off him. I take my seat at the prosecution table, the thick case file before me. The trial is a grim, methodical blur of testimony. Liam Chin, now a civilian and a reluctant witness, is subpoenaed and forced to take the stand. Under oath, his voice thick with a shame he has carried for years, he confirms the true, ugly story of what happened in the Arazal Valley, corroborating my account in every damning detail. Military psychologists and ethics experts testify to the absolute, non-negotiable requirement of the warrior ethos: I will never leave a fallen comrade. They speak of the sacred, inviolable trust that binds a unit together, a trust that Marcus Thorne violated in the most fundamental, unforgivable way. Finally, it is my turn to stand and deliver my closing statement, my formal recommendation for sentencing. This is it. The moment of truth. I rise and walk to the center of the room, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. I see the stern, composed faces of the board members, senior officers who will make the final judgment, but who will be heavily, decisively influenced by my words. I see Marcus, who keeps his head down, unable to look in my direction. I begin not with the UCMJ, not with the specific charges, but with a story. I tell them about a vibrant, hilarious young medic from Chicago named Anya Petrova, who loved terrible puns and could make the grumpiest, most sleep-deprived soldier laugh with a well-timed joke. I tell them about a quiet, earnest private named David Miller, who was scared but determined to prove himself, and who wrote long, detailed letters to his mom every single day. I describe the oppressive heat of the valley, the taste of the dust, the paralyzing grip of fear. I describe, in stark, unflinching detail, the moment of betrayal, not with theatrical anger, but with a devastating, factual clarity that is more powerful than any outburst could ever be. I describe the sound of those retreating footsteps, the silence that was more terrifying than the incoming fire, the feeling of being utterly, completely abandoned. I describe waking up in a sterile German hospital, knowing my friends were dead, and knowing, with a certainty that was its own kind of torture, that the man responsible had not only walked away, but had been hailed as a lucky survivor. I hold up Anya's dog tags, letting them catch the light. This, I say, my voice clear and resonant in the hushed courtroom, is the true cost of dereliction of duty. This is not an abstract concept in a manual. It is the cold, hard metal of a life cut brutally short. It is the trust that was shattered on a rocky hillside 8 years ago, a trust that is the very bedrock of our profession. When that trust is broken, everything we are, everything we stand for, crumbles into dust. I turn and look directly at Marcus, forcing him, in this final moment, to bear witness. He finally meets my gaze, his eyes filled with a desperate, hopeless terror, the same terror that once governed his actions. But this proceeding, I continue, my voice softening, shifting in tone, is not about vengeance. Vengeance is a hollow, self-consuming pursuit. It doesn't rebuild what was broken. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't restore honor. This is about justice. And justice, true, lasting justice, must be about more than punishment. It must be about restoration. It must be about ensuring, in the most concrete way possible, that such a failure of character, such a catastrophic betrayal of trust, never happens again to another soldier, another team, another family. I pause, letting my words sink into the silence, allowing the board to feel the shift in the room. Sergeant Thorne is a broken man. He has been living with the ghost of his own cowardice for years, a ghost that has now taken solid, undeniable form in this courtroom. A prison cell will not fix that brokenness. Throwing him out onto the street with a dishonorable discharge will not fix it. It will only create another broken, bitter, and potentially dangerous soul, adrift in the world with nothing left to lose. The army failed him once, by not holding him accountable for his first, most grievous failure. It failed me. It failed Anya and Miller. We cannot, we must not, fail again. We must not simply dispose of him. We must repurpose him. I take a deep, steadying breath, arriving at the conclusion I have wrestled with all through the sleepless night, the conclusion that feels, for the first time, like true justice. Therefore, I do not recommend a dishonorable discharge or a term of confinement in a military prison. A shocked, audible murmur runs through the room. Marcus's head snaps up, his face a picture of utter, bewildered confusion. My recommendation, I say, my voice ringing with a newfound conviction, is that Sergeant Marcus Thorne be reduced to the rank of private, forfeit all pay and allowances, and that he be issued a general discharge. But that is not all. My recommendation is that his discharge be conditional, and that the condition is one of service and atonement. That he be required to spend the next 5 years working full-time with veterans' charities, specifically those dealing with combat PTSD and moral injury. That he must speak, publicly and repeatedly, about his failure. That he must tell his story, the real, unvarnished, shameful story, to every new unit, every NCO academy, every pre-deployment briefing he can be assigned to, as a living, breathing cautionary tale. He must use his failure, his shame, his cowardice, as a lesson for others. He must be forced to look his own failure in the face every single day for the next 5 years, and be compelled to build something good, something useful, from its ruins. That is his sentence. To live with what he did, not in the comfort of obscurity, but in the glaring light of service, and to be forced to use that painful knowledge to prevent other soldiers from making the same catastrophic choice. That is how we honor Anya Petrova and David Miller. Not with his punishment, but with the good that their sacrifice can, through him, force into the world. The courtroom is utterly, profoundly silent. It is a punishment far more complex, more psychologically brutal, and in many ways, far more fitting than a simple prison term. It is a punishment not just of his record, but of his soul. It forces him to confront his sin every day, to weaponize his shame for a greater good. The board retires to deliberate. The wait feels like an eternity, each minute stretching out into an hour. When they finally return and file back into the room, their faces are unreadable. The president of the board, a stern-faced colonel, announces that they have considered the evidence and the recommendations, and have accepted the prosecution's sentencing proposal in its entirety. It is over. Later, as I am gathering my notes, my hands finally steady, Marcus approaches me. The room is empty now, the spectators and officials having departed. He stands before me, a man stripped of everything, his rank, his pride, his career, his future. He is a private, a nobody, facing a captain. Why, he whispers, his voice cracking with a confusion that seems to overwhelm him. After everything I did to you, after what I took from you, why would you do that? Why not just destroy me? I look at him, not as the monster of my nightmares, not as the personification of my pain, but as a deeply, tragically flawed human being. The hatred that has fueled me for 8 long years has finally burned itself out, leaving behind only a weary, profound, and strangely clean sadness. Because someone I respect very much once told me that you can let your wounds destroy you, or you can use them, I say quietly, my voice calm, devoid of malice. I chose to use mine to become a better officer, a guardian of the trust you betrayed. Now, Marcus, you don't have a choice. You will use yours. You will use your failure, your cowardice, your shame as a tool to save others. You will spend the next 5 years making sure no one else has to go through what I went through, what Anya and Miller went through. That is a far greater, far more meaningful justice than any prison cell could ever be. You have to live with what you did, Marcus. Really live with it. You have to stare at it in the mirror every morning and use it to do good in the world. And maybe, just maybe, in doing so, you can save one other soldier, one other team, from suffering our fate. That will be Anya's and Miller's true legacy. Not your punishment, but the tangible, lasting good that somehow, impossibly, comes from their sacrifice and your failure. I pick up my service cap and tuck it under my arm. I don't look back as I walk out of the courtroom, leaving him standing alone in the heavy, echoing silence. The weight on my soul feels different now. It hasn't vanished, the ghosts of my friends will always be with me, but it has shifted. It is no longer the crushing, bitter weight of a thirst for vengeance. It is the lighter, more purposeful weight of duty fulfilled, of a hard-won, complicated peace. The sun is bright outside, washing the base in a clear, clean light. I walk back towards my office, my steps steady and sure, my head held high. The ghosts are still with me, but they are quieter now. They are no longer screaming for revenge. I think they are finally, truly, at rest. He left me on the battlefield to die. But I didn't just survive. I came back with the authority, the wisdom, and the strength to forge a justice deeper and more profound than any he could have ever imagined. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The past is a battlefield, but it doesn't have to be your grave. You can choose to build a future on it, even if the foundations are made of sorrow, and scar tissue, and the hard, unbreakable lessons of loss.